Okay, in this video I'm going to teach you about the brush tool. And there is a surprising amount to know about the brush tool, but we're just going to cover the basics so that you have a general sense of how to use it. So the first thing you need to know is where the brush tool is. And it is right here. And you can left click it to select it. Also, if you're selected on something else and you're out here working and you want to just use a shortcut, you just hit the B key on your keyboard and you'll see I'm now changed to the brush. And you see this little circle here, that is your brush. And of course when we're selected on it here, we have a new option bar up here which has a whole bunch of things. And we're going to cover a few of these things. So the first thing is that you have this little drop down menu here. And this allows you to adjust the size of your brush and the hardness of your brush. These are probably two of the most important things. The size, you can see the size right here. It's at 25 pixels. But if I slide this slider way up, you'll see I now have a giant brush at 306 pixels. And the hardness is how hard the edge will be. So if I'm all the way to the left and I have a very soft brush, you can see it's going to paint very soft edges. And if I'm all the way up to the right and I have a very hard-edged brush, you'll see that it paints very sharp edges or hard edges. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Alt-Z twice to get rid of those. And one more time back to here. And then down below in this menu you can select different types of brushes. And you can play with some of these different brush effects and whatnot if you want. We're not going to get into that. The main thing right now is we need to know the size and the hardness. Okay? And I'm going to dial these back down for now. And I'll close that menu. And if you click this one, you'll get a bunch of brush settings. We're also not going to worry about that, but you can select different sizes and textures of brushes in here. And one of the other very important things to look at is your opacity and your flow. And these are fairly similar to each other, but I'll explain the difference. If you have them both turned up all the way, and you notice I just hover over the word, it gives me these double arrows and I can make adjustments. You also have a drop down here. But if we're on 100% for both of them, and I go to make a line, make a little smaller brush using my left bracket, and I make a line, you can see that that's completely opaque, meaning that you can't see through it. Now if I dial down the opacity to 10%, then when I make that line, it's only 10% opaque. Now if I do a line over that again, then it'll be more opaque, and I could continue building this up. See how it builds in layers? But each stroke that I do is only 10% opacity. Okay? And if I'm working out here, you see it's just 10%. And then each layer that I put on is going to make it more and more of the color that I have selected. Okay? But one thing to notice is that if I hold down the brush and I go over the same spot over and over and over, notice how it's not getting any lighter. It's just staying at that 10%. I have to release the mouse or release the pressure on my pen and then press or click again to get more opacity. Now that's where the difference between opacity and flow exists, because if I go to full opacity, 100%, and I reduce the flow to 10%, now I'm going to have a similar effect, but now if I hold the mouse button down and I continue to go over, you'll see that it continues to make it more opaque. With flow, you also get more of a feathery effect. It just has kind of a different blending, whereas your opacity is sort of like a computer-generated effect. But both can be valuable in the right circumstances. And then one final thing I'll show you right here is smoothing. And if we start with smoothing at 0, and I'll make my brush smaller so this is easier to see. And I draw, let me get rid of some of these. There we go. And if I put my flow up to 100% and my opacity to 100%, smoothing at 0% is going to do no smoothing of my lines. So if I'm trying to draw a zigzag and I'm doing a poor job of it, you'll see these little kind of handshakes in here. Now if I dial up the smoothing to a high percentage like 75%, and then I go and try and draw almost the same pattern, notice it's going a lot slower, but it's also smoothing out all of my handshake and jiggles. See the difference in those two lines? Okay, so that's what smoothing does. I'll get rid of those two. And then the final thing I want to introduce to you is your little color palette over here. And this is your foreground and background color. And by default, if you click this button right here, your foreground color will be black and your background color will be white. And this is going to come in really useful later on down the road for a lot of different things, like when you're doing layer masks and things like that. But for the moment, what you need to know is that if you click on this, it will reset everything. And if you click on this one, it'll give you an option to set this color to something other than black. We'll cancel that for now. And if you click on this one, it will give you the option to set it to some color other than black. And then if you hit this little button, it will switch them. So right now we have black as the foreground color, which is going to be our brush color. But if we hit this little button, it will switch them so then we now have white. You can also do that by pushing the X key on your keyboard. See, I'm pushing the X key and it's switching those back and forth. So let's see what happens when we have black as the foreground color and we go to brush, we get black. If we hit the X or we click here, we're going to have white as the foreground color. Now our brush is going to be white. Okay, and I'm going to turn off the smoothing. So when we have white as the foreground color, white, switch them, black is now the foreground color, paint with black. Okay, so let me show you a couple of quick examples of what you can do. And that will be it for our tutorial on brushes. First of all, notice in our layers I am selected on the background right now. And you almost never want to work directly on your background. So if I wanted to do some work on this image, I would want to create a new layer. And you do that by hovering over this icon right here and clicking it, and it creates a new layer. Now anything that I do will be on that layer and not destroying my original image here. So one thing that you can do with a brush, just as an example, is we could create a little vignette around here. And there are other ways to do this and arguably better ways to do this, like with gradients and things, but I'm just showing you this so you can learn about it. So what we're going to do is just kind of brush in some dark little halos around this image to kind of give it a little vignette. And the first thing you would want to do is bump up your brush size. So I'm going to use my right bracket to get a nice big brush. You can also do that up here by changing the size. And then we're going to make sure the hardness is all the way down so it's nice and soft. And then we can close that. And now we're going to dial down the opacity to 10%. You can go pretty conservative with these numbers, and we're going to do the same with the flow. We're going to dial that down to 10%. And we make sure we're selected as black as our foreground color, and then we're just going to brush in around this to give it a little bit of vignette. And you can check if it's working by toggling your layer on and off with the little eyeball. And see, there's a subtle change. We'll do some more and then you'll see more of a change. So I unclicked my mouse. Now I'm going to click again, and I'm just going to do some smooth strokes here and go around the edges. Then I'm going to unclick one more time, because again, remember, if I don't continue clicking, the opacity is going to keep it from getting darker. I'm going to click one more time and go around this, and we're just kind of darkening the edges here. We might do one more down here because it's so bright. Okay, and now when we unclick that, do you see how it's sort of starting to take on a little vignette? And that'll just draw your focus into the center of the photo. Okay, so that's one thing you can do with a brush. The other thing that I could do is if I wanted to just make a solid layer, and there are a ton of reasons why you might want just one solid layer of color, is I can go in here and let's just, to keep it simple, let's make a new layer for this. Okay, so that was the layer that we were doing the vignetting on. This layer has nothing on it, but we're going to select it and we're going to do a new layer, and we're just going to make a solid fill color. And this would be if you wanted to do a background for some lettering or a poster or something like that, or if you wanted to blend layers together and you needed to blend a color into this. And here's how you would create that layer. So you're going to go to your foreground color and click on it, and then it's going to ask you to pick a color, and you can click through here or drag through here to get into the different hues, reds, blues, greens, etc. And then if you go up toward the top of this area, you're going to pick lighter colors, and as you go down, they're going to get darker all the way to black. So if I click down here, it's going to be black. If I click up way up here, it's going to be very light. And then your saturation, or the intensity of your color, over to the left will be lighter or less saturated, and over to the right will be more saturated, so more intense or bright of a color. So you can see when I click down this side, they're really rich, intense colors. When I click down this side, they're really pale, in fact, gray colors. There's almost no saturation. When I click across the top, they're very light because that's the white scale. And when I click across the bottom, well, I should go a little higher so you can see they're mostly black. Okay, so you can pick any color and you can change the hue. We could go to a blue, and we could pick like kind of a light grayish blue, maybe a little lighter even. Okay, and we can click OK, and that selects that color, and that's now our foreground color. There's one other thing I can do to change this color, is I can just go click on this, and then you'll notice the tool changes. I now have a color picker. And if I want to go and pick a color out of this image, I just click on it. So see, I just clicked the sky here and it became blue. If I click the light color here, it'll become a light blue. I can pick this kind of vibrant green and I'll get that. So you can pick any colors out of your image as well to go into here. And then when I click OK, that's my new foreground color. Okay. And now, since I'm selected on a new layer and I have this big brush, now if I don't do any changes and I leave the opacity and flow low, it's not going to do what I want it to do. I mean, it will start to cover over a little bit, but that's not what we're looking for. What we want is full coverage. So we need to dial up our opacity and flow. And you can use the slider, but you can also just hit numbers on your keyboard to change these. So for instance, if I hit a 2, it's going to change to 20. 3 is 30. 4, 5, 6. See how the percentages are changing? All the way up to 9 gives you 90, and then 0 gives you 100%. Okay, so that just is a keystroke for adjusting your opacity. And then if I hit the Shift key, I can do the same thing with the flow. I go Shift and 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And then if I jump up to 0, that'll make it 10. And one cool thing too is if you want a smaller percentage, like 55%, If you just hit the 5, it'll go to 50%. And again, I'm still holding the Shift key for the flow. But if I quickly hit the 5 twice, then it'll go to 55%. Or if I want 59%, I can quickly hit 59, and it'll go to 59%. But if I slowly hit them, I hit the 5, and then it takes me a while to find the 9. Then when I hit the 9, it's going to go to 90%. But we want full flow and full opacity, so we're going to hit the 0 for 100%. Now I can let go of the Shift key, and now I have a full intensity brush here. And I'm just going to brush over this with that new bright green, and see how it's just covering the entire thing. This is best to use a very big brush so that you can get everything filled in. And then kind of go around the edges, make sure you got it really good. Okay. And then I'll dial back the size of the brush just so it's not so distracting. And now we have this full color layer, and you can see the color right there. And it's its own separate layer. And if I wanted to do things like mask off part of this image and have some of this color show through, or a million other reasons, then now I have that fill layer. And if I want to turn that off, I can just toggle it off, and I can toggle it back on. Okay, and just to give you a really quick example of how you might use this layer. So this layer is on top of the background, right? And we have what are called blending modes. And right now the blending mode is on normal. And you'll notice there are blending modes up here as well for your brushes. But right now when it's normal, that's going to make this just behave just like a brush, right? So I brushed over everything and it just has this full color of paint. But if I change the blending mode, I can make this layer interact differently with these other layers, okay? So the best example I want to share with you is multiply, and you'll find yourself using this from time to time. If I click multiply, watch what happens. See how you can still see the original image, but it's sort of tinted with this color. And what it's doing is this layer is basically working with this layer and blending some of the colors and hues, okay? And if I toggle this off, then we get that bright original image. And if I toggle it back on, you see that this is basically tinting that, okay? But that's getting off the subject. Really, we're talking about brushes. And again, if you want to use your brush, you click there, or you hit the B on your keyboard, and that will select your brush. You can change your sizes and your hardness here. Hard edge, soft edge, small, large. You can change your, you can change your opacity and your flow. And remember, you can use just numbers on your keyboard to change the opacity. And if you want to change the flow, you can just hit Shift and use the same numbers on your keyboard. And then you can select your colors down here. And if I want to put this back to normal, I don't like that yellow color, I don't want to use it for my next brush, I can just reset these by clicking right there. Now I'm back to a black brush, and if I wanted to brush on here, there we go. So again, that's just a really basic introduction to brushes so that you know kind of where the tool is, how to make some adjustments to it, and how it works. And later you'll see some examples of how to actually use it in a functional way in an image.